Have you ever been so busy that you ignored what truly mattered? Imagine being a billionaire, racing to an important meeting and coming across a frail, abandoned dog in a cold, dark alley. Would you stop to help, or would you shove it aside like it's just another obstacle in your day? What if in your rush you lashed out, maybe even hurt the very creature that could change your life forever? Today, we unravel a story of arrogance, redemption, and the power of an unlikely bond. Stay with us to discover how one billionaire's actions led to a moment that no one saw coming. Chicago, a cold winter morning. The city awoke under a grey, overcast sky, with biting winds swirling through the streets, carrying scraps of paper and the frosty breath of hurried pedestrians. Nathan Sterling stepped out of his sleek black limousine parked at the curb. Adjusting the collar of his long coat, he braced himself against the sharp chill cutting through the air. Today, Nathan was on his way to an important meeting, a negotiation that promised millions in profit. Every minute mattered to him. But as he turned down a narrow street to shave off time, his steps faltered at an unexpected sight. In a shadowy alley, among torn garbage bags and peeling walls, lay a Labrador retriever. Its golden fur was matted and dirty, clinging to its bony frame. The dog shivered against the icy wind, its ribs starkly visible. Despite its frailty, the dog's soulful brown eyes were fixed on Nathan. There was no fear or desperation in the gaze, only a quiet sadness that pierced through the morning stillness. Nathan felt an odd discomfort creeping up his spine, like an invisible weight pressing on him. He frowned, irritated. "Get out of my way," Nathan muttered, waving his hand dismissively. The dog didn't move. Instead, it let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound so raw and haunting that it lingered in the air. Nathan's irritation flared. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, kicking a crumpled soda can near his polished shoes. The clang of metal echoed sharply off the alley walls, but the dog barely flinched. Its eyes remained locked on Nathan's, steady and unyielding. The gaze unsettled him. There was something unnervingly deliberate about it, as though the dog was silently judging him. Nathan shook his head, brushing off the thought. "It's just a dog," he muttered to himself. Turning on his heel, he strode away, the sharp clicks of his leather shoes reverberating in the alley. Sterling Enterprises stood tall in the heart of Chicago, its glass facade gleaming like a monument to Nathan's success. As he entered the lobby, his assistant Anna approached him with a tablet in hand, listing the day's agenda. Nathan gave a curt nod, barely acknowledging her, as he headed for the elevator. The boardroom was as pristine and commanding as Nathan himself, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline. This was his domain, where he thrived on control and precision. But today, something was off. The meeting began, with sharp suits presenting figures and charts around the long, polished table. Nathan usually dominated such discussions, his presence alone enough to steer the room. But as the voices droned on, his mind wandered. The image of the dog in the alley kept flashing before him. The frail body, the trembling limbs, but most of all, those eyes. Steady, sorrowful, and haunting. No matter how hard he tried to focus, they intruded into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. Nathan recalled a parable he hadn't thought of in decades, the Good Samaritan, a story his mother had shared with him when he was a child in church. The idea of helping someone or something so vulnerable seemed distant and almost ridiculous to him now, and yet the weight of his indifference gnawed at him. "Mr. Sterling," a voice interrupted, snapping him back to the present. Nathan blinked, realizing the room had gone quiet. "Continue," he said, his voice sharp but detached. He straightened in his chair, trying to regain control, but his rhythm was off, the distraction evident. As the day wore on, the memory of the dog refused to leave him. By the time Nathan returned home that evening, he felt a restlessness he couldn't explain. The grandeur of his mansion, Its crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and gilded mirrors felt unusually hollow. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat by the fireplace, its warmth doing little to soothe his unease. The dog's image replayed in his mind with relentless clarity, the trembling body, the mournful whimper, and those eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why can't I stop thinking about it?" Nathan muttered under his breath, frustrated. For years he had mastered the art of shutting out anything that didn't serve his ambitions. Yet now, a stray dog from a filthy alley had somehow breached the fortress he had built around himself. He stared into the dancing flames, feeling the cracks in his resolve widen. He thought about the story of the Good Samaritan again. Had he become like the priest and the Levite, walking past someone or something in need without a second thought? Before heading to bed, Nathan did something he hadn't done in years. He whispered a quiet prayer. "God, if this is something I need to act on, show me a sign." Nathan Sterling stepped out of his limousine as the cold Chicago wind nipped at his face. The city, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, seemed quieter than usual, the hum of distant traffic muffled by the frigid air. Nathan hadn't planned to be here again, standing at the entrance of the same grimy alley he had hurried through earlier that day. But the image of the Labrador retriever, frail and trembling, had haunted him relentlessly. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he ventured into the shadows. The alley looked just as it had that morning, dim, cluttered with garbage, and cloaked in a sense of abandonment. Nathan's breath formed small clouds as he walked deeper, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. And there it was. The dog was still lying in the same spot, curled tightly against the cold. Its matted golden fur clung to its bony frame, and its shallow breaths were barely visible in the icy air. Nathan paused, staring at the animal, an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest. He had expected it to be gone. Instead, it was still here, surviving against all odds. He crouched down slowly, his coat brushing the frosty ground. "Why are you still here?" he muttered, his voice tinged with both frustration and curiosity. The dog opened its eyes and looked at him. That same gaze, steady, sorrowful, and piercing, met Nathan's, freezing him in place. The billionaire felt a strange pang of guilt, as if the dog were silently accusing him of something he couldn't name. With a quiet sigh, Nathan stood and shrugged off his overcoat. The cold bit into him immediately, but he ignored it. Bending down, he carefully draped the coat over the dog's frail body. The fabric swallowed the trembling creature, and for a moment Nathan thought he saw its shivering ease. "There," he murmured, straightening up. "That's all I can do." As he turned to leave, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from deeper within the alley. Nathan's instincts flared and he spun around. Emerging from the shadows was a disheveled man, his clothes tattered and his eyes glinting with something dangerous. In his hand he held a small rusty knife. "Nice coat," the man growled, stepping closer. "What else you got?" Nathan's heart pounded. He wasn't used to this, being cornered, being vulnerable. He raised his hands slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Take the coat, that's all I have." The man chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "Oh, I'll take the coat, but I bet a guy like you has more. Wallet? Watch?" Nathan backed up a step, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the icy ground. His mind raced for a way out, but the alley offered no escape. Before he could respond, a low growl broke the tension. Both men turned toward the source of the sound. The Labrador, still wrapped in Nathan's coat, had pushed itself to its feet. Despite its frailty, the dog stood firm, its lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. A deep, guttural bark erupted from its throat, echoing off the alley walls. The man faltered, his confidence wavering. "What's this? Your guard dog?" he sneered, trying to sound unfazed, but there was a hint of fear in his voice. The dog barked again, louder and fiercer, stepping forward despite its unsteady legs. Its golden fur bristled, and its stance radiated defiance. For a moment, the man seemed to consider pressing his luck. But the dog let out another thunderous bark, and the man's resolve broke. "Forget it," the man muttered, lowering his knife. He took a step back, then turned and bolted into the shadows, his footsteps fading quickly into the distance. Nathan stood frozen, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked down at the Labrador, now swaying slightly from exhaustion. Despite its weakened state, it had defended him, standing firm against a threat it had no obligation to face. "You?" Nathan began, his voice trailing off as he crouched down again. The dog looked up at him, its eyes softening. He reached out hesitantly, placing a hand gently on its head. The dog flinched at first, but then relaxed, leaning slightly into his touch. For the first time in years, Nathan felt something stir deep within him, something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Humility? Perhaps both. Whatever it was, it left him profoundly unsettled and deeply moved. Nathan rose slowly, casting one last look at the dog before stepping back into the night, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't yet understand. The alley fell silent after the attacker fled, the echoes of his retreating footsteps fading into the cold night. Nathan Sterling remained still, his breath visible in the frigid air, his hand still resting on the Labrador's head. The dog, wrapped in Nathan's coat, stood unsteadily, its legs trembling as if they might give out at any moment. Nathan crouched down, his piercing blue eyes studying the creature more closely. The Labrador's once steady gaze now seemed clouded with exhaustion. Its breathing was shallow, and its frail body swayed slightly before it collapsed onto the icy ground with a soft whimper. "You've done enough," Nathan murmured, his voice softer than he intended. He hesitated, glancing down the alley toward the street where his limousine waited. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let this moment pass as just another strange incident in his meticulously controlled life. But the image of the dog standing between him and danger flashed in his mind. "It saved my life," Nathan realized, the thought hitting him like a wave. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond his usual detachment, a connection, raw and undeniable, to a living being. Nathan carefully lifted the Labrador into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its body almost weightless in his grasp. The dog stirred weakly but didn't resist, its head resting against his chest as if it finally allowed itself to trust. The warmth of Nathan's coat around the dog seemed almost symbolic, a fragile bridge between two lives that couldn't be more different. As he carried the dog back to the waiting limousine, Nathan noticed how quiet the streets had become. The city's usual noise seemed distant, muted by the snow that had begun to fall in soft, swirling flakes. "Open the door," Nathan instructed his driver. The man obeyed without question, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the bundle in Nathan's arms. "Take us home," Nathan said firmly, as he settled into the back seat, the dog resting on his lap. The drive back to Nathan's sprawling estate felt longer than usual. The warmth of the car's heater began to revive the dog slightly, and it let out a soft sigh, its body relaxing against him. Nathan couldn't help but glance down at it, noticing the way its chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. He thought about the moment it had stood up for him, weak as it was, and he felt a strange ache in his chest. When they arrived, Nathan carried the dog inside, his footsteps echoing through the grand foyer of his home. The opulent space, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless art, felt oddly cold and uninviting compared to the fragile warmth of the dog in his arms. Nathan laid the dog gently on a thick plush rug near the fireplace in his living room. The Labrador didn't move, its energy completely spent. "You're in worse shape than I thought," Nathan muttered, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts before dialing a 24-hour veterinary clinic. The receptionist on the other end was brisk but polite. "We'll send someone right away," she assured him. As he hung up, Nathan knelt beside the dog, his hand hovering uncertainly above its head. Finally, he let his fingers brush its fur, feeling the rough texture of its matted coat. The dog didn't flinch this time. Instead, it opened its eyes briefly, looking at him with an expression that Nathan could only describe as gratitude. The veterinarian arrived quickly, her expression softening the moment she saw the dog. "Poor thing," she murmured, kneeling beside it. She examined the Labrador carefully, noting its malnourished and dehydrated state. "With proper care it should recover," the vet explained. "But it's going to take time, a lot of time." "Do whatever it takes," Nathan said without hesitation. The vet worked efficiently, administering fluids and tending to the dog's immediate needs. Nathan watched from a distance, his arms crossed, but his gaze never left the scene. As the vet packed up her supplies, she asked, "Do you want me to take it to the clinic for continued care?" Nathan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "It stays here." Over the next few days, Nathan found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, tending to another being's needs, waiting anxiously as the dog's condition slowly improved. He hired a caretaker to assist, but he often found himself by the dog's side, checking on it between meetings or during long nights in front of the fireplace. The Labrador, now clean and free of its matted fur, began to show signs of life. Its coat gleamed faintly under the soft light of the living room, and its eyes, once dull with exhaustion, started to regain their brightness. One evening, as Nathan sat in his study, a memory surfaced, a vivid snapshot from his childhood. He was a boy, no older than 10, running through an open field with Max, the golden retriever his family had once owned. Max had been his closest companion, his protector during lonely nights, and his partner in countless adventures. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling. He hadn't thought about Max in decades. His childhood dog had been a source of unconditional love, something Nathan had buried deep as he built his empire and shut himself off from vulnerability. "You remind me of him," Nathan murmured aloud, glancing toward the living room where the Labrador now rested peacefully. The dog's name, Buddy, slipped into his mind unbidden. He tried it aloud the next morning. "Buddy," he called softly as the dog stirred on the rug. Its tail wagged faintly, a subtle acknowledgement that made Nathan smile despite himself. For Nathan Sterling, this wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about rediscovering a part of himself that had been lost for years. As Buddy's strength returned, so did Nathan's sense of purpose, one that went beyond wealth and power. The days at Nathan Sterling's grand estate began to take on a rhythm, one punctuated by the quiet presence of Buddy. The Labrador's recovery was slow but steady. Its golden coat now gleamed under the warm light of Nathan's home, and its eyes, once filled with sorrow, grew brighter with each passing day. Buddy's presence had a way of filling the vast empty spaces of the mansion, softening its cold, pristine edges. For Nathan, life had always been about precision, control, and success. Yet now his mornings started differently. Instead of rushing out the door for an early meeting, he found himself lingering in the living room, kneeling beside Buddy to check on him before heading to work. Sometimes Buddy would wag his tail faintly, a small but meaningful gesture that brought a flicker of warmth to Nathan's otherwise steely demeanor. One morning, Nathan stood by the window overlooking his manicured garden, sipping his coffee. Buddy lay on the plush rug nearby, his head resting on his paws. The quiet companionship was something Nathan had never realized he needed. A knock on the door broke the silence. Anna, his ever-efficient assistant, entered, holding a stack of files. Her eyes briefly flicked to Buddy, and Nathan caught the hint of a smile on her face. "He's looking better," she said softly. Nathan nodded, his gaze returning to the dog. "He is." Anna hesitated, then added, "I've never seen you like this before, sir." Nathan glanced at her, a faint crease forming on his brow. "Like what?" "More Present, she replied, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Nathan didn't respond immediately. He merely turned his attention back to Buddy, watching as the dog stretched lazily before curling up again. For years, Nathan had moved through life with tunnel vision, focused only on the next deal, the next success. But now he was noticing the small things, like the way Buddy's ears perked up at certain sounds or how his tail wagged in subtle gratitude after a meal. One evening, Nathan sat on the floor by the fireplace, a bowl of water and a plate of cooked chicken placed in front of Buddy. He had insisted on preparing the meal himself, despite the household staff offering to handle it. Buddy sniffed at the food cautiously before eating, his movements slow and deliberate. Nathan leaned back against the couch, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're a picky eater, aren't you?" he muttered, half to himself. Buddy looked up briefly, as if understanding the comment, and Nathan chuckled. The sound surprised him. It had been years since he laughed at something so simple. As Buddy ate, Nathan's thoughts drifted. He remembered the night in the alley, the moment Buddy had stood between him and danger, despite his weakness. The dog's loyalty and courage had been unwavering, even when it had nothing to gain. That moment had changed something in Nathan, broken through a layer of cynicism he had carried for years. Buddy's presence also began to alter Nathan's approach to his work. At the office, he found himself pausing during meetings, his thoughts drifting to the dog waiting for him at home. For the first time in years, he left work early on occasion, ignoring the puzzled looks of his colleagues. One afternoon, as he walked into the house, Buddy greeted him at the door, his tail wagging energetically. Nathan crouched down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Good to see you too," he murmured, a genuine warmth in his voice. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, now felt different. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was becoming a home. Nathan's transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around him. Anna, ever observant, noticed the subtle changes, the way he spoke more kindly to the staff, the way he seemed less rushed, more thoughtful. Even his demeanor in the office shifted. During a meeting, he paused mid-sentence to ask an overworked colleague if they needed more support, a gesture that left the room momentarily stunned. When asked about it later, Nathan simply shrugged. "Some things matter more than the bottom line," he said, as if realizing it himself for the first time. Buddy, meanwhile, began to grow stronger. His once frail frame filled out, and his steps became more confident. Nathan started taking him on short walks in the garden, enjoying the crisp morning air and the peaceful rhythm of their strides. Buddy would pause occasionally to sniff at the grass or chase a falling leaf, his tail wagging with newfound energy. On one such walk, Nathan stopped to watch Buddy play with a stray twig he had found. The sight was simple but profound. For a moment, Nathan wondered how many moments like this he had missed in his life, how many small, beautiful things he had ignored in his pursuit of success. One evening, Nathan sat by the fireplace, sipping his scotch as Buddy lay beside him, his head resting on Nathan's foot. The flames danced in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Nathan stared into the fire, his mind drifting to memories he had long buried. He remembered Max, the golden retriever he had as a boy. Max had been his companion during a time when life was simpler, before ambition and success had consumed him. Nathan recalled running through fields with Max, laughing as the dog chased after sticks. Max had been loyal to the end, a source of unconditional love that Nathan hadn't truly appreciated until now. Looking down at Buddy, Nathan felt a pang of regret, not just for Max, but for all the years he had spent shutting himself off from connections like this. "You've reminded me of something I forgot," Nathan said softly, his hand resting on Buddy's back. The dog stirred slightly, letting out a contented sigh. For the first time in years, Nathan felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind that came from closing a deal or adding another zero to his bank account. It was the quiet, profound peace that came from recognizing what truly mattered. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Nathan Sterling found himself at a quiet cafe in downtown Chicago. The city hummed with life outside the large windows, but Nathan's focus was elsewhere. He sat at a small corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee, waiting for someone he hadn't seen in years. The door chimed softly, and in walked Tom Reynolds. Nathan recognized him instantly, though the years had added streaks of grey to his old friend's hair and fine lines to his face. Tom, once a rival in their younger days, now carried an air of calm confidence, dressed in a simple yet elegant sweater and jacket. "Nathan," Tom said with a warm smile, extending his hand as he approached. "Tom," Nathan replied, standing to shake his hand. The two men exchanged pleasantries before sitting down, their conversation quickly moving from polite catching up to something deeper. "Never thought I'd see you outside a boardroom," Tom joked, sipping his coffee. "Still chasing mergers and acquisitions?" Nathan smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair. "Something like that. And you? Last I heard, you left the corporate world entirely." Tom nodded, his smile softening. "I did. Walked away about a decade ago. Now I run a foundation for rescuing abandoned animals." Nathan raised an eyebrow, the faintest flicker of curiosity crossing his face. "Animals?" "Yes," Tom said, his tone earnest. "We rescue dogs, cats, and even some wildlife, rehabilitate them and find them new homes. It started small, but it's grown into something I never imagined. The need out there is enormous." Nathan sipped his coffee, his expression guarded. "And that's what you've dedicated your life to? Animals?" Tom chuckled. "I get that reaction a lot. But it's not just about animals, Nathan. It's about making a difference, even if it's in small ways. You'd be surprised how much a simple act of kindness can ripple out." Nathan didn't respond immediately. His mind flicked to Buddy, who was likely resting back at home. He thought of the night in the alley, of how Buddy had stood between him and danger, despite his frailty. Tom's words struck closer to home than Nathan cared to admit. Tom leaned forward, his tone growing more serious. "You know, Nathan, I'm not here just to catch up. I've heard about your recent changes. Word travels fast, even in our circles." Nathan frowned. "What changes?" "Buddy," Tom said simply. "Your dog." Nathan stiffened slightly, surprised at the mention. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know," Tom interrupted gently. "What matters is what he's done for you. I see it in your eyes. You're not the same man I knew years ago." Nathan looked away, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. Tom's words made him uncomfortable, but they also rang true. "Why are you telling me this?" Nathan asked after a pause. "Because," Tom said, his voice soft but firm, "I think you're ready to do something more. You have the resources, the influence. Imagine the lives you could change if you joined me, even just a little." Nathan let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know, Tom. That's not my world." Tom smiled knowingly. "Maybe it could be. Why don't you come see for yourself? Visit the shelter, meet the animals. You don't have to decide now." The conversation shifted after that, moving back to lighter topics, but Tom's invitation lingered in Nathan's mind. As the meeting ended and they stood to leave, Tom placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Think about it," he said simply. "Sometimes we find purpose in the most unexpected places." Nathan nodded, though he didn't reply. As Tom walked away, Nathan felt a weight settle on his chest. He wasn't used to being asked for help in ways that didn't involve money or deals. Yet, Tom's words had struck a chord. That evening, Nathan returned home to find Buddy waiting by the door. The Labrador's tail wagged faintly as Nathan stepped inside. He knelt down, rubbing Buddy's ears as the dog leaned into his touch. "You've changed me more than I realized," Nathan murmured, his voice low. Buddy looked up at him, his brown eyes full of trust and loyalty. As Nathan sat in his study later that night, Tom's invitation replayed in his mind. He stared into the fire, his thoughts swirling. Could he really step into a world so far removed from the one he had built? His life had always been about numbers, power, and control. But now, for the first time, he wondered if there was more. He glanced at Buddy, who was curled up on the rug by the fireplace. The dog stirred slightly, lifting his head to look at Nathan. In that moment, Nathan felt a quiet clarity. Buddy's unwavering loyalty and courage had already taught him the value of connection. Perhaps it was time to take a step further. "I'll think about it," Nathan said aloud, more to himself than to Buddy. The dog tilted his head as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" Nathan Sterling had always been a man of action, driven by a relentless pursuit of power and success. But standing in his opulent office on the top floor of Sterling Enterprises, gazing out at the sprawling Chicago skyline, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: disconnection. The city's hustle, once a reflection of his ambition, now felt distant, like background noise, to a life he no longer recognized. The meeting with Tom and the quiet presence of Buddy had been working on him in ways he couldn't explain. That morning, as Nathan stared at his reflection in the glass, he made a decision that would surprise everyone, most of all himself. A week later, Nathan sat at the head of the conference table in Sterling Enterprises' sleek boardroom. His executives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Nathan cleared his throat, his voice steady and deliberate. "I've spent decades building this company," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I've realized something recently. There's more to life than balance sheets and profit margins. Effective immediately, I'll be stepping back from my day-to-day responsibilities. I'll remain involved as an advisor, but the reins of leadership will pass to someone else." The murmurs of disbelief were immediate. One executive leaned forward, his voice incredulous. "Sir, are you certain about this? The company needs your guidance." Nathan met his gaze, his voice firm but calm. "It will be fine. I've built a strong team here, and I trust you all to carry this forward." The decision, though met with surprise and skepticism, left Nathan feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he wasn't chasing success. He was chasing meaning. A few days later, Nathan arrived at Tom's animal rescue shelter. The modest building was a stark contrast to the sleek offices he had spent his life in. Inside, the air was filled with the sounds of barking dogs and the faint hum of activity as volunteers moved between kennels. Tom greeted him warmly, leading him through rows of cages. "This," Tom said, gesturing to the animals, "is why we do what we do. Every one of these lives matters." Nathan paused in front of a kennel where a small terrier wagged its tail enthusiastically, its eyes bright with hope. He crouched down, meeting the dog's gaze. For a moment, the terrier reminded him of Buddy, the same quiet resilience that had drawn him back to the alley that night. "What happens to them?" Nathan asked quietly. Tom smiled. "We care for them, help them heal, and find them homes. It's not always easy, but every success makes it worthwhile." Over the following weeks, Nathan began to immerse himself in the work. He joined Tom on rescue missions, driving to remote locations to save abandoned dogs. He helped feed and clean the animals, often rolling up his sleeves and diving into tasks he never thought he'd do. One evening, as Nathan was helping a volunteer coax a scared pit bull out of its kennel, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The dog, trembling and hesitant, finally stepped forward and licked Nathan's hand. It was a small victory, but it filled Nathan with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Buddy, now fully recovered, often accompanied Nathan to the shelter. The Labrador quickly became a favorite among the volunteers, his calm demeanor bringing comfort to both people and animals. Watching Buddy interact with the other dogs, Nathan felt a quiet pride. The dog who had once been abandoned in a cold alley was now helping others find hope. Nathan's transformation didn't stop at the shelter. Inspired by the work he was doing, he began funding new projects through Tom's foundation. He used his resources to expand the shelter, build better facilities, and launch programs to educate communities about animal welfare. But it wasn't just about the money. Nathan spent time talking to the families who came to adopt the dogs, ensuring they understood the responsibility of caring for an animal. He listened to their stories, often finding himself moved by the compassion of strangers. One evening, as Nathan and Tom sat on the porch of the shelter, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Tom turned to him with a smile. "You've changed," he said simply. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," Tom replied. "You seem at peace." Nathan looked out at the field where Buddy was playing with a group of rescued puppies. For the first time in his life, he felt he understood what Tom meant. Success wasn't about numbers on a ledger or the size of a bank account. It was about connection, about making a difference, even in small ways. That night, back at home, Nathan sat by the fireplace with Buddy at his side. The flames danced in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Nathan reached down, running his hand through Buddy's soft fur. "You've taught me more than I ever thought possible," he said softly, his voice tinged with gratitude. Buddy looked up at him, his brown eyes steady and trusting. For the first time, Nathan felt whole. He had found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for, a life of meaning, built not on power, but on kindness. Nathan Sterling stood at the edge of a wide open field, the autumn breeze rustling the tall grass. Beside him, Buddy trotted happily, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. It had been months since the night in the alley, but the changes in Nathan's life felt as if they had been years in the making. No longer burdened by endless meetings and towering expectations, Nathan now spent his days in simpler, more meaningful ways. The cold, calculated businessman had given way to a man who found joy in the small things, a wagging tail, a quiet walk, or the laughter of a family adopting their first pet at the shelter. One evening, Nathan sat on the porch of his estate, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Buddy lay at his feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in years, Nathan felt at peace. "You know, Buddy," Nathan said softly, looking down at the dog, "you saved me as much as I saved you." Buddy's tail thumped gently against the wooden porch as if to say, "I know." Nathan leaned back, his mind wandering to the countless lives Buddy's courage had indirectly touched. Through his work with Tom, Nathan had helped dozens of animals find homes, each adoption a testament to the power of compassion. And it all started with a single moment, a dog in an alley, standing its ground to protect him. One Sunday morning, Nathan found himself at church, something he hadn't done in years. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the pews as the pastor spoke about redemption and second chances. Nathan listened intently, his heart stirred by the message. As he knelt in prayer, he thanked God for the journey that had brought him here. "Thank you for Buddy," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change." Back at home, Nathan watched Buddy chase after a ball in the garden. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for Buddy, but for the lessons the dog had taught him about love, loyalty, and living a life of purpose. Nathan knelt down as Buddy ran back to him, the ball in his mouth. He ruffled the dog's fur and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes filled with trust and affection. For Nathan, this was more than a second chance. It was a new beginning, one built on faith, hope, and the unshakable bond between man and dog. Nathan's story reminds us that no matter how lost or hardened we may feel, God's grace can touch our lives in the most unexpected ways. Through Buddy, Nathan found redemption, purpose, and a renewed faith in the beauty of life's simplest blessings. Just like Nathan, we are never beyond the reach of God's love. Sometimes it takes a small act of courage or the unconditional love of a loyal companion to open our hearts to His plan. May this story inspire you to look for the miracles in your own life, no matter how small they may seem. Whether it's lending a helping hand, showing kindness to a stranger, or simply opening your heart to a furry friend in need, know that these moments are reflections of God's infinite love. If Nathan and Buddy's journey touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your own stories of love, kindness, or second chances. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed your life in an unexpected way? Let us know. And don't forget to share this story with someone who might need a little hope today. By spreading these tales of faith and compassion, we can create a ripple of kindness that reaches far and wide. As you go about your day, may God's blessings fill your heart with love, hope, and peace. May you always find comfort in His presence and the courage to embrace the second chances He offers. Thank you for joining us on this journey. God bless you and your loved ones.